Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don. I'm a consultant in life sciences, and I help companies manage complexity and increase performance. Before we hop into the episode today, I wanted to talk a little bit about our digital media marketing company. If you're looking to establish a digital media presence inside of life sciences, please reach out to us through d3dm.com. It's one great organization that we've started to form that more or less is looking at how to help companies in our space just establish everything regarding their digital presence. And so please take a look at the things that we have there. In addition to that, I wanted to welcome our guest today. So my guest is Dean McAlister. Dean is the Executive Vice President of Inizio Biotech. He has over 25 years of executive leadership experience in pharma in both growth stage and startup organizations. So with that, welcome, Dean.
Thank you. Great to be here with you today, Don.
Yeah, thanks so much. Well, could you just take a moment to share with the listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. As you mentioned, I've had a lifetime in this industry, the life sciences industry. In fact, when I joined what was a predecessor to AstraZeneca in 1988, I don't even know that it was called the life sciences industry. We were part of a British chemical company and just happened to be the pharmaceutical arm of that. And I was just glad to have a job after college. So I look back on that now and think, thankfully, someone believed in hiring talent and growing skill because I did not have much skill. And I really didn't even know what the talent was that I was bringing to the industry. But I did bring an inquisitiveness and initiative and desire to learn. And those are things that through all the different twists and turns of a career, I have found have served me well.
Yeah, isn't it interesting though? I mean, there are a lot of times whenever, let's say you go into a job interview, whether you're fresh out of college or anything else. I mean, the one thing that you need to demonstrate is a bit of a presence in terms of, I've already, done these things, and these things will enable me to do the thing that I'm, coming to work for you for. And, what I hear in what you're saying is that, just that ability to learn and the ability to grow was something that got you started. I think that, oftentimes whenever I look at people that we're looking to hire, oftentimes I'm looking at the total runway of that individual. Is there a lot more capability than, maybe even what we're covering in the overall job interview? And I think that's so important.
It is important. And now looking back with 35 years in the life sciences business, it's a different part of the runway for me. But what I also realize is that all of the experiences along the way have given me an extended runway that you don't even realize that you're going to have. You're like to believe that you're consciously competent in things that you do, but it's amazing how many times in our professional lives we find ourselves unconsciously incompetent and hopefully growing toward conscious competence. But some days I look back and think, well, the most important step in any strategy is taking action. You may not always know exactly what you need to do, but you do know that you need to act and you need to get going. And that inertia then often informs the next step, particularly whenever you've had a lifetime of experiences in one industry or dogma.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those things where oftentimes in these conversations, I sort of also find myself, looking at the individual, trying to overall piece together, the longer bits of their career, but in that there's a bit of the person, just like I'm hearing you describe, Dean, that you're trying to keep that inquisitiveness and trying to keep the your mind open, to that growth as well.
Yeah, I had a premise whenever I left college that I had studied marketing for whatever that was worth, or even what that meant. I wasn't even sure what it meant. It just you're supposed to get a college degree, so I got one, and that seemed something that I was interested in, maybe the path of least resistance. And I had interviewed with more traditional marketing firms like Xerox at that time, if anyone remembers what that might be, Coca-Cola, Hallmark cards, and then a friend of mine was working for Stewart Pharmaceuticals, which was the predecessor that I mentioned. And he said, well, why don't you try pharmaceutical sales? And it was just that simple. And I thought, you have to be really smart to do that. And then I looked at my friend and I said, how are you doing in this? And he goes, oh, I'm doing great. And I had known him a while, so I figured I could intellectually compete with that at least. And I might as well give it a try. So I threw my hat in the ring for it and went for it, and have never regretted the opportunity to join an industry that brings such great value to patients and to society, and contributes toward the 20% of GDP that is healthcare. You know, you're in the largest sector of the economy, and you have a great deal of opportunity to grow and to deliver value. Through all that time, I had no idea all the things that I would actually do. But all that I knew then was I needed to do the next thing well. And I've tried to keep that as a dictum to follow ever since.
Yeah. And as a part of your career, so you were at AstraZeneca for 28 years. Throughout your time there, did you learn skills and capabilities that now help you whenever you're working with startups and newer organizations?
I found that I did. And of course, I had no idea what a post AstraZeneca career would look like then. But it's actually served me quite well, because the benefit of having worked inside AstraZeneca, it was an innovative company, and there were a lot of ups and downs. You know, people now say, oh, you worked at AstraZeneca, and they think of the vaccine for COVID that was made available in the partnership with Oxford. They think of the powerhouse of oncology drugs that they now have, and a bet that the CEO, Pascal Soriot, made in 2015 that he could grow value from inside the company greater than taking a Pfizer offer. And he fought off that offer, and he's proven to be right. So that great company that it's become, I lived through many lean years in that same organization. But I learned a lot during those times. Whenever the Astra and Zeneca merger came about in 1999, the Zeneca part of it was about a $2 billion company. And then here came the merger with Astra and the opportunity to take on massive scale and really grow into all that the organization would become. But then around 2011, here came a whole patent cliff of multiple brands, big brands going off patent, from what became Seroquel onto Nexium to Crestor, and some dry valleys over the next few years. But then look where they are today, you know, and look at
Yeah.
the reinvention. So what did I learn that relates to the world of emerging biotech now is these are a lot of companies that are in very nascent stages, and they see a future and a hope and a belief. They're going to have data maybe coming out in a phase 2 study that might then inform where they go, get more funding, et cetera. I have the confidence of being able to look back and see what drug development looks like in a big organization, and kind of what the narrative needs to be, and the story of a brand that needs to be developed. And obviously, I can't do all those things myself, but that's the benefit of what's been put together now at Inizio, is a constellation of best-in-class companies that can actually help an emerging biotech organization from early drug discovery all the way through to marketing, commercialization, and anything that happens in between. We have agencies across our 4 divisions and about 35 different independent individual companies that are now all joined together under one ownership, to be able to help them to craft a narrative, to staff departments, to be able to have a presence in the field, come up with campaigns, do all the scientific rigor that's necessary, to then come about with an agent that they either bring to market or they might partner out. But my learnings from AstraZeneca taught me about scale, and about just regular determination and dogma, about following a path and having a launch plan and staying true to that. And a lot of these organizations are very science intensive, but yet the leaders therein don't have a tremendous amount of business savvy and experience. So if by nothing else, all that I learned, some by osmosis, some by intention, from AstraZeneca, I'm able to put in place and be able to give them the value of my experiences to keep the ball moving down the field, and to be able to allow them to truly curate an asset and to maximize the value of that asset, whatever they may want to do with it.
Yeah, I feel like that's a very important point at the very end whenever you're talking about scaling an organization, because I work with a lot of very innovative companies, and there are brilliant people that are there that are working on kind of their piece of bringing something to light. But at the same time, you have to have those base processes, you have to have base structure in place to be able to scale from. Otherwise, adding people and things like that, just it becomes more and more frustrating. And that's what I've seen in the industry as well, is that when you go from 10 to 20 to hundreds to to the point where you're starting to incorporate new organizations into yours, you better have something to scale from, uh, or you will certainly fail. You'll struggle to try and bring things to light, which then will possibly waste an investment in something at the end of the day.
In today's challenged capital environment, also where money isn't falling out of trees like it was just a few years ago in this sector, you have to be able to not overstaff. If you're working at emerging biotech, you should be looking for every way to minimize FTEs that you're taking on yourself. And that's why we market what we do as the ability for them to use a flexible resource, a variable cost, and engage us with the specialist expertise to come in and complement their internal knowledge. Because these are bright people, unbelievably bright. Sometimes I feel like I am a waiter at a Mensa meeting. Like how in the world did I even get in the room? But what I can do though is to move them along and also to connect them to the people in our organization that can match intellectual horsepower with them. We have our medical division, which has 2,300 employees through a lot of the best known names in medcoms. 700 of those have terminal degrees. I often tell my colleagues in that division, I don't have a PhD or a PharmD, but what I do have is a PhD in speed, and I'm going to help things to move along quicker. And that's a big part of the value that I bring into our organization now.
Yeah. So with that, can you tell us a little bit more about Inizio Bio?
Sure. Inizio Bio is private equity owned, and the organization has been brought together over the past 3 years through purchases that private equity did of two different organizations, Ashfield, UDG, and Huntsworth. Both of those were big British organizations that housed a lot of biopharma service organizations themselves. And now, having been brought into a private environment to be able to have the opportunity to scale the synergies of both of those organizations collectively into one. There are four divisions. We have an advisory division of companies that are largely strategy, management consulting, benchmarking, market research, all the things you would think of from the kind of intellectual heft that has to be brought into looking at what type of strategy someone should have as they go to market or developing an asset, whatever the case may be. We have a medical division that I referred to earlier. That's about 2,300 people, big names within MedCom, some of them going all the way back to the 1980s, the early nascent part of our industry. We also have a Marcoms division, so all of our marketing and communications organizations there, and we can help craft messaging for HCP audience, could be for patients, could be for any other channel, market access, whatever it might be. That's where all of our IR, PR companies reside, a whole multitude of ways that across those 1,500 people, we can help with managing and developing a message for an organization. And often, of course, in this sector, we work a lot with companies as they're going into phase 3 and beginning to decide to go it alone in the marketplace. And then our largest division at Inizio is the Engage division. Sometimes this is called a postscript division. That's not entirely the case, but it's emblematic of what that organization particularly represents. That anytime you're looking at, well, what is the patient journey here? What type of road does a patient go from diagnosis to ultimately being on a medication? So we have one of our agencies therein that can help with that patient journey mapping. We also do advanced analytics and taking a lot of the type of data organizations get from an IQVIA and helping to add to it from a value perspective to look at forecasting, market sizing, territory mapping, whatever might be required there. And then we also have within that team a meeting and events training organization, leadership development company and finish it off with really any type of outsourced function that an organization might need in any global footprint, from a sales team, medical affairs, field people like MSLs, possibly nurses, really anything that you might need to represent in the marketplace. And back to the point with these being often less capitalized organizations, they're often looking to delay big headcount moves for as long as possible. So we often find ourselves in a position to supply a field force of any kind for, say, a year to 18 months. And then maybe that organization by then, after they've started to get some sales and get some more stock heft in the marketplace, will want to move those people over themselves to be their own. So we often find that the Engage division has some transient nature to it by intentionality, but it's our largest group of about 7,000 people. So total, the organization represents about 12,000 people total, 1.7 billion in revenue, and a global footprint. And I'm proud to say, having been involved as an organization in the overwhelming majority of launches over the past 5 to 10 years in the industry across our collective companies, because of course the bulk of our revenue comes from big pharma, the companies like AstraZeneca. But I get the pleasure of working in a very small subset of Inizio that provides our services as much or as little as is needed actually to this emerging biotech sector. So I think I've got actually the greatest job of any of those 12,000 people in our organization.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to hear, and great to hear the overall reach. I couldn't agree with you more in terms of, the headcount demands and things like that. I've actually experienced, a bit of the opposite. Whenever you have investors, come in, they oftentimes they want, the organization to grow and be forced to grow. And so, oftentimes you see sort of this forced headcount growth that's put in place in organizations that frankly, you sit there and kind of scratch your head. Do you really need, all of these people, on board? It just seems, a bit early, in a bit forced versus, the organic nature of saying, hey, look, we need somebody that does, X. Now let's go, try and do that. I mean, obviously, as you get to the commercial force, there's a bit of a, more commercial people potentially could mean more sales. So, there's a bit of a difference, I think in what I experience on the operational side versus the commercial side as well.
Yeah, companies should, as a general rule, resist becoming too big too fast, especially when there's no revenue line to pay for that. Or even if there is a revenue line, say from some other lesser scale products that you might have on the market, older lines, whatever it may be, you just have to be careful because the cost of drug delivery now and clinical trials, all of those things has escalated at a very rapid rate. The inflationary environment that we see is hitting all sectors of the market. So you should keep anything that you can as a variable cost for as absolutely long as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And on the other side, I mean, I've certainly seen a lot of, fairly large, even large pharma organizations that have, lists mile long of individuals that are contractors inside the organization just because they've continued to, kind of feed that same thing. They're keeping more of their headcount in the variable cost line versus, actually, bringing them into the organization. So, yeah.
True. Yeah. And the way we look at it is we just need to provide value, whatever the client's perspective is. And that's why we say maximizing value of an asset. If they want to go it alone and commercialize, hire their own people, whatever the case may be, we can work with that because there's still plenty of things that are needed. If they want to outsource as much of it as possible, we can help them with that. And what I often find is there's very few times we actually do end-to-end service offerings for, say, a large majority of those agencies with one given customer. In my sector, emerging biotech, it's usually one or two projects at a time because they may have 15 assets or programs in phase 2 or 3, but they really are only focusing on a couple of those at any one time. And this has been the real learning for me from a growth perspective over this past 15 months of doing this and going to financial conferences and hearing how CEOs describe their narrative in front of investors is you have to really watch for the kind of developmental arcs that are most important. And every time there's a data point, that usually means there's another investment tranche coming from the marketplace, but also an investment that they're going to make in their own organization, whether it's people or possibly spending with an outsourced organization like ours to be able to take on another project, et cetera. And that's why, going back to your point about how you have success over a career, is staying current. You absolutely have to stay current. So you have to have the discipline every day to start your day with some way to stay up on your industry. I use Seeking Alpha myself, and I have a list of every company that's public that we deal with or are trying to deal with. And I track their news flow. And it's a great way to then send an article to someone and say, I'm paying attention to what you got going on. And I'd like for you to talk to me because I've got an idea for you. Whole lot more likely to speak to you than someone just, continuing to send them a countless number of unsolicited emails. You have to have something that breaks through the noise. And that has been a big part of what I've learned is you have to contribute to the narrative in this sector, and you have to figure out where they're going and then help them get there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so important. And, it's one of the things that I frankly am guilty of, as well, is that I have, an awful lot of content, in general. But those pieces that, honestly will help, people more, are the ones that are still sitting in a pile, that are the things that I still need to, finish up and work on releasing a bit more. But, that's a great tip. Seeking Alpha is a great, tip for anybody that's looking for possible ways to connect with organizations in our space. I know oftentimes I use Stat is one great place that has a lot of great news as well. And oftentimes it's just a great way to connect to people as well. So yeah. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you face at Inizio Biotech?
Well, the biggest challenge that I personally face is just getting in front of people that I want to talk to and that need to talk to me. They just don't know it yet. And you have to have a great degree of resilience and tenacity and creativity to be able to make yourself relevant in front of people that didn't wake up that morning going, I want to talk to Dean McAlister. Who is this again? Well, I often find myself in situations where, as I mentioned with conferences, you get maybe 2 minutes to go up and talk to the executive leader that just spoke to the analyst, and you have that amount of time to make an impression and come away with a follow-up. And you have to figure out, okay, what's going to be whatever this individual said during this time that I'm going to latch onto, that then immediately establishes some credibility, some rapport, and then the opportunity to either get the next conversation with that person or who should I talk to in your organization. And then you've got a way to get in because you've got someone who said, go talk to this guy or that lady. Okay, great. Then you've got a reason when you contact them to say, I just listened to your big boss talk to the street with your value proposition, and he asked me to speak to you. He suggested we talk. Because you have to find a way to get through to that. And then you get your moment of opportunity, and never more than 30 minutes in an introductory dialogue. And it's often in this same kind of format we are today, something that's virtual. You have a couple of minutes to show you're relevant, you paid attention, you know what you're talking about. You have to get into your content. You have to provide some salient examples. And then you have to find a reasonable action from there. What's the next thing that you need to do? And you have that 30 minutes that is either going to turn into an unmitigated disaster if you don't plan for it, or it's your chance for them to say, like, there's something different about this individual, because that's what they're going to say first. And then they're going to go, there's something different about his organization, because someone like that must work for an organization that's got some value, or else he wouldn't be there, right? So that's what I've learned to break through that challenge, is to be able to be creative, but to be relevant to people and to establish that very, very quickly.
Yeah, that's so important. And then what are some of the biggest opportunities that you have at Inizio in the future?
Well, just following this sector for me is a huge opportunity. We also are realizing that it's not just the emerging biotech organizations one at a time that you want to talk to, but it's also beginning to look and see how those organizations are aggregated, because with the financial pressures that are in this sector, you often have to go upstream to that, to the type of organizations that have collections of these types of companies, and making yourself relevant there, because then it can be more of a one-to-many kind of an approach instead of just a one-to-one approach. The other thing that to me is exciting, and this is somewhat of a personal and professional reflection, but after all this time in the industry, so many people that I've grown up with in this industry are now in places where they're running things. They're running sections of organizations, maybe running the entire organization at this point. And so it's an interesting point in life where your contacts that you have meet your competence that you have to then create opportunity if you play that well. And you're not doing it in any way to take advantage of the relationships that you may have with people that you've grown up with in the industry, but it's actually to help them do their job well. Because just like you want to have a great story and a great legacy and a great career narrative, they're wanting to do the same thing, and they're wanting to make high impact, high value, and they like doing it with people that they trust. So what
Yeah.
I have found is the opportunity is in taking my desire to cause things to happen and put it up against what the other person is actually trying to accomplish, and then finding where that matches. And I'm thankful that we have such great organizations that are within Inizio that I have no difficulty standing with confidence to say, no matter what it is that you need to do, I have an organization that I can then go to and my subject matter experts, and I can bring them back to you, and they will be able to deliver that. I'm not the person that will do that. I tell people often I can talk about anything for 5 minutes and nothing for six. But my value as a connector, more than a maven, is where I'm finding great satisfaction and great joy. But I am great at a dinner party for just a few minutes to talk about any topic that you would want to bring up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I actually was having a similar conversation last night that there's a set of skills that I feel like I have where I can help organizations, but there is a also just a set of knowledge that's more or less needless everywhere else other than a dinner conversation. So
Right. I
yeah,
call it
I agree.
odd facts known by few, cared about by less.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree with that mindset as well. Well, Dean, there are three questions that I like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
Well, what inspires me is the ability to help people see that their work can have purpose beyond just a paycheck and beyond just the next job. I often would have people came to me when I was an executive leader and led teams of up to 1,100 people at AstraZeneca, and they would want to know what I thought they should do next. And I said, well, it's more important to think about what you need to be next. And so inspiring people toward a legacy that they can actually create. That's what truly inspires me, is the ability to inspire others.
And what concerns you?
What concerns me is that people have chronic partial attention in our world today. And I have it myself sometimes. And I often think I'm trying to do so many things concurrently that I'm not sure sometimes that I'm delivering the best results on any of them. And moments like this, where you have 30 minutes that's just literally dedicated to one thing, are some of the most valuable contributions that I think I can make. And my concern is I don't get to do that type of thing as much as I would like.
Yeah, I've described this before that oftentimes I see people that one, their calendars are sort of stacked with meetings, meetings on top of meetings. They don't even get a break to think for a moment or compile their notes or anything else. Yeah, I wrote a book called Overcommitted. That's the blue cover that's just up over my head, which essentially talks about that very topic. We go extremely deep on how do you sort of control your focus instead of letting your focus be controlled by other things, which I completely agree. It's a challenge for people today, but it also it's kind of born out of things that I feel like even I grew up with throughout time. So it's not new, but at the same time there are opportunities today to have even more distractions if you're not careful. And what excites you?
Well, what excites me is creating something that's sustainable beyond me. And that's why I love this emerging biotech sector and working for Inizio, and this opportunity I have on a daily basis to help to bring the next great innovation to market that may cure a disease that has no remedy today, and that may provide hope for people longer term and give them chance to see things in their future that they think right now are just not tenable. And I want to be able to create within our organization the ability for all of those approaches to be sustainable beyond me. So, not just predicated on my individual effort, but that I'm building something that other people see, are inspired by, and then come along beside me and ultimately behind me to achieve things way greater than what I could even imagine myself.
So important. Well, Dean McAlister, thank you so much for being here on the Life Science Success Podcast. I greatly appreciate you being here, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.